The snow was falling again, silent and endless, soft as memory. Through the tall windows of the mansion, the city below glittered like 1,000 distant stars, but inside everything was still, too still. Daniel Carter, the man who built an empire from nothing, sat at a dining table that could seat 20. And yet he was the only one there. A roast turkey sat untouched. The wine in his glass reflected the firelight, deep crimson, like a wound that refused to heal. He didn't know why he still did this, setting the table, lighting the candles, pouring wine he'd never drink. Perhaps it was habit. Perhaps it was grief. Every Christmas it was the same. 5 years had passed since that night. The night the snowstorm took his wife, Elena, and their little daughter, Grace, on their way to surprise him at the office. He had been too busy that evening, too focused on closing another deal, too blind to realize he was losing the things that mattered most. Now, he was surrounded by everything money could buy: art, luxury, silence, and yet, nothing filled the emptiness. Daniel leaned back in his chair and let out a bitter laugh. "Merry Christmas, Daniel," he muttered to himself, his voice echoing in the lonely dining hall. Then came the sound. Knock. Knock. He frowned. It was late, nearly midnight. No one ever came here uninvited. His staff had gone home hours ago. The property gates were closed. He waited. Knock, knock. Again, louder this time. He hesitated, then stood, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. When he opened the heavy oak door, a gust of icy wind rushed in, along with the sight of 2 figures standing in the snow. A woman, no older than 30, her dark hair wet and clinging to her coat, held a little girl's hand. The girl, small, maybe 6 or 7, and had rosy cheeks, a knitted hat too big for her head, and the brightest eyes he'd seen in years. I'm sorry to bother you," the woman began, her voice shaking slightly. "We live down the street. The storm hit harder than we thought. Our power's been out for hours and I saw the lights." She trailed off, clearly embarrassed. The little girl stepped forward, her voice gentle and clear. "We brought cookies, mister." Daniel blinked. "Cookies?" She nodded proudly and held out a small paper box wrapped in red ribbon. The corners were smudged with flour, and one ribbon loop had come loose. "They're not perfect," the woman said quickly, blushing. But she wanted to share. Said no one should be alone on Christmas. The words hit him like a whisper straight from the past, a voice he could almost still hear. "Promise me, Daniel. Never spend Christmas alone." He swallowed hard, his throat tight. The firelight from inside framed them both. The woman trembling from the cold, the little girl smiling up at him, her mittened hands offering the gift with such pure sincerity. "Please?" the girl asked softly. Daniel's voice cracked slightly when he finally spoke. "Come in." The house, moments ago a mausoleum of silence, now flickered with life. The fire crackled, spreading warmth across the room. The smell of cinnamon and cocoa filled the air. Daniel had fetched blankets for the girl and her mother and poured hot chocolate for them both, something he hadn't done for anyone in years. The little girl, Emma, was perched on the rug, arranging cookies on a plate. She hummed softly to herself, a Christmas song he recognized but hadn't heard since. Before. Her mother, Sophie, sat on the couch with the mug in her hands, her eyes darting around the lavish space, the grand piano, the garland-wrapped staircase, the portraits on the wall. "I'm really sorry we came," she said, her voice nervous. "We didn't mean to intrude. Emma she doesn't like the idea of anyone being alone on Christmas." Daniel shook his head slowly. "Don't apologize. You've done something no one else has in 5 years." Sophie frowned gently. "What's that?" He met her eyes, his voice quiet but full of weight. "Knocked on my door." She didn't know what to say. Emma looked up suddenly and smiled. "Your house is pretty, mister, but it feels a little sad." Daniel's lips twitched. "Does it?" She nodded seriously, tilting her head, like it forgot how to laugh. Sophie's eyes widened. "Emma," but Daniel chuckled softly, the sound surprising even him. Maybe it did. Emma giggled, her joy so pure it almost hurt to hear. "That's okay. We can fix it. Mommy makes the best cookies." Daniel crouched beside her, watching her carefully sprinkle sugar dust on top of the misshapen treats. You made these with her? Yep, Emma said proudly. I stirred the dough and didn't even spill it this time. Her confidence made Sophie laugh, and the sound filled the room, light, warm, alive. It was the first real laughter this house had heard since Elena and Grace. When Emma offered him one of the cookies, Daniel hesitated. It was uneven, overbaked, and the frosting was more enthusiastic than artistic. But he bit into it, and for some reason it tasted like home. He smiled, truly smiled. Sophie noticed. There it is. He looked up, confused. What? Your first Christmas smile? She said softly. Daniel felt something shift inside him, something old and heavy loosening its grip. I'd forgotten how that felt. They talked for hours. Sophie told him how she worked at a diner nearby, how hard it was to raise Emma alone, but how her daughter's joy made everything worthwhile. Daniel found himself listening, not as a CEO, not as a man who'd built walls of wealth around his grief, but as a man who'd finally found warmth again. As midnight approached, Emma fell asleep, curled up on the couch, a cookie still in her hand. Snow whispered against the windows and the firelight painted gold across her small, peaceful face. Sophie stood quietly, pulling the blanket higher over her daughter. I should thank you, Mr. Carter. You gave her a Christmas she'll never forget. He looked at her, his eyes soft, tired, and full of something new. No, Sophie, he said quietly. You and your daughter gave me one. She hesitated, seeing the emotion in his eyes, grief and gratitude intertwined. You must have loved them very much, she whispered. He nodded once. More than anything. She gave him a sad smile. Then maybe tonight, they sent us, to remind you that you're still allowed to feel joy. He didn't speak, just looked at her, at the child sleeping peacefully nearby. And for the first time in 5 long years, he believed her. When Sophie turned to leave, Daniel stopped her gently. It's late. The storm's still strong. Please, stay the night. You'll be safe here. Sophie hesitated, but one look at Emma's sleeping face made her nod. He smiled faintly. Good, I'll bring more blankets. As he walked to fetch them, he caught his reflection in the mirror, a man who, for the first time in years, didn't look alone. And as the clock struck midnight, the house that had forgotten laughter finally remembered what it felt like to be alive.